Oh boy, is it time for another special issue already? I think it is. Oh, I think it is. And today we are looking at yet another game adaptation of a game that we've already kind of covered in the past. Remember when we met Knuckles earlier in the comic? Yeah, neither do I, but that was more of an adaptation, again in the loosest possible sense, of Sonic 3. Today, we're taking a look at its direct sequel/other half, Sonic and Knuckles. And boy, do I enjoy this cover. It's gritty and it's dirty and it perfectly spells out Sonic and Knuckles' relationship at this point in time without a single word. Not to mention, I like the corner aspect of this issue, even if it does make it a bit obvious that Sonic's about to get slugged. Knuckles, I'm pretty sure he can see your foot right there. And Robotnik, something's wrong with your shadow, buddy. Not only are parts of you missing, but it's also not reaching the other side of the wall. We open to the first of 3 stories in the comic, our main one, Panic in the Sky. We're told via narration that the western coast is awesome because it's one of the few places on Mobius that hasn't been struck with conflict just yet. Of course, that starts to change when these extras, and a gratuitous cameo by the useless substitute freedom fighters, are overtaken by a massive shadow looming overhead. As it turns out, it's Angel Island deviating from its usual course and coming out over the landmass underneath. Naturally, everyone panics. Back with the freedom fighters, Rotor, Sally, Antoine, and Bunny, hey look, we found her! Discuss the sudden appearance of the island and what it could be. According to Rotor's calculations, the island is moving straight for Knothole Village. Sonic and Tails walk in and, seeing Angel Island, decide now would be a great time to recount everything that happened back in issue 13, suggesting that they never bothered to inform the other freedom fighters about the adventure where they discovered a massive floating landmass that was held aloft by one of the most powerful objects known to exist. Great job with the whole hero thing, Sonic. The situation explained, with Sonic pointing out that Knuckles is, at this point at best, a totally neutral party. Sally decides that until they have a clear idea of Knuckles' intentions, they have to assume the worst. And as such, Sonic, Tails, and Antoine get up into a plane to take a closer look. Initially, it looks like everything's going to be hunky-dory as Antoine gets them in for a closer look, but then holy crap, the island's packing! As Sonic so quaintly puts it,
Well, something new has been added.
Sonic and Tails skydive onto the island from above, noting that the artillery seems focused on aiming down rather than up. Knuckles is, of course, watching from the sidelines, and once again seems to think Sonic and Tails are his enemies, so nothing new there, even though it's a bit of a stupid assumption to make, given his last encounter with them, but hey, this was back in the day when Knuckles' behavior was easier to chalk up to years of isolation and poor social skills, rather than him just being a stone-cold idiot.
Oh wait, I can't read.
I do have to say, though, there are some nice nods to Sonic and Knuckles' first zone here, with Sonic and Tails jumping across large mushrooms, riding through weird pendulums, and even fighting the lumberjack boss from the end of the first act. However, the nods to the game stop there as Sonic falls down a hidden sinkhole into an underground cavern where Knuckles confronts him on the edge of a cliff. Thanks to a missed stone throw by Tails, Sonic and Knuckles end up falling down a chasm onto a block surrounded by what I think is supposed to be lava, but looks more like incredibly deadly oatmeal. Tails pulls them out, but of course Knuckles is still pretty damn confrontational, not enjoying having intruders of any sort on his island. After Sonic points out that the stars are totally different from what they should be, and points out that his entire freaking island has been turned into a battle fortress, Knuckles becomes a bit more obliged to help out, and they head to the Chaos Emerald, Mario style. Inside, they discover that some sort of energy siphon has been put in place, redirecting the Emerald's energies. Knuckles does attempt to remove it, but gets a hearty shock for his trouble. And then Robotnik appears, gloating that he was able to easily retrofit the island by basically tunneling into the Foundation with a mobile command base, and building outwards from there, using the energy from the Emerald to power everything. Not a bad plan for what it's worth, and it explains why Knuckles wouldn't notice, since he's not exactly looking at the bottom of the island that often. Using the floating island, he plans to drive it until it's over Knothole, and then once in position, rain down death and destruction upon it with guns and bombs and flamethrowers that he's installed. So, wait, now he actually knows where Knothole is, even though the fact that it was completely hidden from him was a big part of the mythos? I mean, I could understand it if he was just going to firebomb the whole forest and hope that he took out Knothole, but he specifically states that he is aiming for the village and only the village. Anyway, previewing events that would happen years later, Knuckles picks up the Chaos Emerald and decides that rather than let Robotnik continue to use the island as his personal battle fortress, the best course of action is to shatter the thing, which of course starts to cause the island to fall. Robotnik hightails it out of there, convinced that he's won anyway, since they're directly over Knothole now, and a big floating landmass falling on top of them is just about as good as bullets and bombs. However, Knuckles reveals that he switched out the real emerald with a fake, which is the one he smashed, and he pulls out the real emerald from under some debris. How anticlimactically convenient. Can't think of a convincing way to get your characters out of a jam in the allotted page amount? Just say they did something that they obviously couldn't have and brush it off. Problem solved. The island stops with a comical screeching sound effect, and Sonic and Tails share their goodbyes with Knuckles. While they do offer him a chance to join the Freedom Fighters, he refuses, saying that he has to keep defending his island, because he does such a good job of it. Sonic and Tails meet up with the other Freedom Fighters. Also, hi again, Bunny! This is just gonna be a recurring joke for a while, isn't it? Sonic and Tails explain that Knuckles isn't interested in joining the Freedom Fighters, and that now and forever, he's probably on his own. This is an alright story, minus a few hiccups here and there. As a game adaptation, it's once again the bare minimum, and it takes a lot of liberties with what the plot of the game actually is, which makes sense seeing as the game literally takes place right after Sonic 3, and they only have half of an issue to tell the story, even though it's an extended special issue. The only big part of the game that's highlighted is the Mushroom Forest Zone, but after that, it's a pretty basic story. The fight between Knuckles and Sonic doesn't last that long and has even less of a reason to happen this time around, given that Knuckles knows they aren't out to hurt him or his island, and he wasn't even aware that the island had moved before they showed up. Robotnik's plan is a pretty good one, all things considered, tunneling in from the bottom and basically hijacking the entire island. But at the same time, it introduces the plot hole about whether or not he knows where Knothole is, and I'm fairly certain that the fact that he doesn't know is pretty vital to the series. The artwork in this story is also fairly good, but we find ourselves in a position where there are multiple artists handling this story, and so we get a very noticeable shift in style between the first and second part. Part 1 is by Art Mawhinney, who does the same sort of semi-realistic style and proportions that we saw during the Sally miniseries, and all of the characters look real good in this part, that's for sure. But when Part 2 rolls around, the art shifts to Dave Manek, and while I feel there was a concerted effort to try and make the styles mesh well, Manek's style is very clearly not Mawhinney's. His artwork is much more cartoonish, exaggerated, and angular, with a lot less detail in the backgrounds and the characters. Not saying either style is good or bad, or better than one another, as I profess that I like both of their art styles, though both of them work better when paired with particular types of stories, but here the sudden shift is very jarring and noticeable, and I do feel it hurts the flow of the narrative somewhat. Let's move on to the first of our two backup stories, both centering around, as the book refers to him, Sonic's friendly nemesis, Knuckles. I think most of us in the literary world would describe someone like that as a rival. The first story is called Fire Drill, and oh god, the artwork. Alright, I'm just gonna go ahead and address this now. The artwork in this story is not very good, and it really is one of the biggest flaws of the backup story. I mean, the story itself isn't really anything to write home about, save for its ending, but let's focus on what we're looking at. Both the script and the pencils and inking of this story were done by our old buddy Ken Penders. And I'm sure plenty of you out there who are fans of the comic have, let's just say, strong opinions about him. And I've mentioned him a couple of times already, but this is the point in the series where his influences really start to shine through, especially when it comes to Knuckles. Now, whether you love or hate the guy as a writer, he is the one who, for better or worse, would help to shape a lot of the lore and characters in the comic for a good chunk of its lifespan. Me, I have a lot of mixed feelings about his style, but I'll get more into an analysis of his style and the problems I have with it when he's writing more and more of the story, particularly when we get to the Knuckles ongoing series. However, in terms of his artwork, I don't think I'll get much hate for saying that he is, by far, the weakest regular artist to ever work on this book. Not the worst artist in the book in general. There would be plenty of artists down the line who only worked on a couple of issues that were far, far worse than this, but Ken Penders, in terms of the regular artists and writers on the book, is the worst in terms of his art. It just looks off all around. Everything about the style seems to have something wrong with it. Perspective, anatomy, generally keeping the characters consistently on model. Penders struggles with these all the time whenever he's putting pen to paper in the name of art. It's not bad for basic artwork, and Lord knows this sort of stuff is all over DeviantArt from young artists looking to get some criticism and become better artists, but this is certainly not the level of art quality one would expect from a professionally published comic, even one that has had some pretty hilarious art gaffes in its early history. The story itself is pretty basic and is a setup to a mystery of sorts, with Knuckles chasing a supposed troublemaker all over the island while ending up in several death traps. While Knuckles escapes from each and every one, he never does figure out who he's been chasing, and at the end, we're given a cliffhanger basically telling us that Knuckles isn't alone on the island, and in fact is being watched over by someone or something that wants to test what he's capable of, and that will get more answers in some of the issues down the line. Not a bad setup for what it's worth, even if the story itself isn't written brilliantly. The fact that Knuckles is constantly talking to himself and to this mysterious stranger definitely doesn't help that much either. And our next and final story for this special comes in the form of Lord of the Floating Island, which actually shares a lot of the same characteristics with Fire Drill, in that it's very short, the story told doesn't really have much substance to it, at least Fire Drill set up events for future issues, and the art isn't that good. No, we don't have Penders drawing this story, though he did still write the script. Instead, the artwork this time was done by Harvey Mercedes Casio, who probably draws the characters even more off-model, more consistently than Penders does. I'm also not sure what the deal is with Knuckles having these faded white patches along parts of his body for a majority of the story either. I know it's supposed to be some sort of lighting effect, but it just makes him look more like his fur's fading in color and he's prematurely aging. The story itself is basically just an excuse to give us some exposition dump about the island itself and how it functions, and what Knuckles does on it, something that was already pretty well established by his behavior before, I would think. The introduction of this nameless baby kangaroo and his mother is also pretty head-scratching, considering that Knuckles is, as far as he knows, completely alone on the island, as in no one to talk to, hence his lack of social skills. In fact, it's a pretty big driving force for his character, and for later plot points in the book, that he does truly believe himself to be all alone and the last of his kind on the floating island. All things considered, this special doesn't feel terribly special. It's a longer than normal issue, yes, but it doesn't feel like it had to be. The first story is pretty alright, about what I'd expect from this point for an adaptation of one of the games, and the reintroduction of Knuckles into the comic is definitely welcome. In fact, this pretty much heralds the start of the obsession with Knuckles and his world and lore that would start to become a sticking point to the series for a while. The backup issue illustrates this as well, with their insistence on focusing on Knuckles exclusively, which makes sense considering the name of the special is Sonic and Knuckles, but neither backup story is really worth the time of day in my opinion, and both seem more like rush jobs to fill space in the page count than anything else, especially the second one. Worth a look for its main story and the first backup story just to keep up with Knuckles' ongoing arc that we're going to see down the line, but nothing to write home about. Next, we're heading back to the main series again, and judging by the cover, it's going to be pretty damn appropriate considering we're well into winter where I am.
Yep. Sky was clear about, 3 hours ago. You could see the ground, you could see the walk. My car was clean. And now, it's looking like it's not stopping anytime soon. Welcome to Maine, everybody.
Least I can read something cold coming from the comfort of a warm room. I'll see you all next time, everybody.